Hey, sister, this is Misty Williams, founder of HealingRosie.com, and I'm so excited to welcome you to Rosie Radio. Tune in to find clarity, direction, and hope for your healing. New episodes drop every Tuesday. We created this show to empower you to regain control of your life and feel like yourself again. Yes, sister, it is possible. You guys, I have been so excited about this awesome conversation I'm going to have with Jason Prahl. If you have tuned in to any of the summits or masterclasses that I've done, you know that we always have the most epic conversations. And I was having dinner with a friend last week who just discovered that her daughter, who I believe is around 13, is slightly autistic. And there was so much regret and shame that my friend was feeling on how she had parented in light of this new lens that she has now for her daughter's experience. And it had me thinking about how all of us are, especially when you have a belief that that something is wrong with you, something is wrong with your body. It doesn't work for you like it seems to work for other people, right? You have a diagnosis, perhaps. Maybe you've gone to a doctor and you've heard your labs are normal and everything's fine. And it's really just messed with your head because you're like, I don't feel normal. I don't feel like everything is fine. How do you navigate your healing through the lens of all this noise? You know, how do you, I started asking myself this last year because I was so frustrated with the weight loss resistance that I was experiencing. This was before I got the mold diagnosis that you have, toxic mold. And that was obviously a big part of why I was kind of spinning in place. But I started really getting present for myself to, this is not my identity. My experience in this reality is not my destiny. And how do I lift myself above, so that I can see clearly and chart a path forward to create what I really want for my life. And I know there's so many women in our community who are feeling the very same thing. You're dealing with these, especially when it goes on for years and years, you start kind of feeling stuck in the soup of symptoms and diagnoses and all of the things you have to do to accommodate this reality. We're going to peel back the layers on this onion with Jason today. And I'm so excited. I really can't wait for us to dig in. So Jason Prahl is a health educator, practitioner, author, speaker, and filmmaker. In 2018, his independent research and experience led him to create the Human Longevity Project, a 9-part film series that uncovers the true nature of chronic disease in our modern world. He's currently finishing his first book on longevity, as well as his next film series that explores ancient methods of healing mind, body, and soul from indigenous cultures around the world. So excited you're here, Jason.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, we just kind of did a big setup here. You and I were talking before we started recording about the individual work that we do, trying to navigate this space and terrain, wanting to get clear on what's happening. And I needed to get clear that it was toxic mold for me and a few of these other things so that I could actually take some steps to eradicate it. But it can get really hard and tiring when you've been on this journey for a while. And especially if you've experienced spinning of your wheels, which most of us do, at some point, to think in ways that are going to actually help us get through it. One of the things that comes up for me that I hear from people is, here's all the things that are making me sick. Here's all the ways I've struggled. And now I can't get well because I can't afford it. I don't have the money. The resources aren't there, right? Going through the trauma of this kind of sickness has you taking on these beliefs about who you are and your condition that can really keep you stuck. And I would love for us to just dig into this a little bit. You were giving me chills before we started recording.
Yeah, it's a big topic, right? Because whenever we're faced with some diagnosis, some set of symptoms, some challenge, whether it's even with our health or elsewise, we're creating these narratives. We're creating these stories about what it means, what it looks like, how long it's going to take, how much money it's going to take, all these things, right? And so it's really interesting because we're very rarely do any of us actually deal with what is. And rather, we're dealing with the stories that we're creating in our mind, right? And this is not something to be critical about, but rather just to observe. What are the stories that I'm telling myself? Are these even true? Where are these coming from, right? And a lot of the time, these stories, these narratives, these beliefs that we're creating come from our conditioning, from our childhood, from a place of ignorance, from a place of fear, right? Because it's uncertain. We don't know what to do, right? And so when we don't know what to do and we become scared because we have no path forward, oftentimes the mind just goes crazy, right? And it just starts to run loose. And so it's just an opportunity to really look at what the beliefs are. What are the stories that are being told, right? And if we have enough awareness, we can actually track our bodies. We can actually feel what it feels like inside. What does it feel like? And what does this fear feel like? Does it feel jittery and shaky? And does it feel cold? Can I even feel my body? What's going on? So I think this is with a little bit of awareness, we can just pause and get curious about what's happening as I sit here and think about my situation. Right? And this can fluctuate from day to day. So it's not a static type of environment that we find ourselves in. But I think day to day, this is what we continuously are living with. We're living with these beliefs, living with the conditioning, living with the thoughts and the ideas and the energetics. And that's really what's governing our physiology. It's what's governing even the thoughts. So sometimes even the feelings can govern the thoughts, right? So if we can slow down, we can pause, we can feel into ourselves, we can just kind of analyze what's going on. And that'll at least give us a starting point, a baseline for what's true and perhaps what might be going on from that sort of story perspective, right? And again, those stories and those ideas and those beliefs are generally created from a younger version of ourselves, the 4-year-old version of ourselves, the 6-year-old, the 9-year-old, right? Because they're coming from that conditioning, they're coming from ignorance. And so I think just with that perspective, it starts to open up potentially some possibilities, right? Because so often we can get merged. We get so merged with our experience that we can't entertain a perspective. We can't entertain an idea, right? If we think about business or any other endeavor, right? We want to give ourselves the opportunity for something new to enter, a new idea, a new way out, right? If we're caught in a box and we can't figure out how to get out of this business struggle that we're in, right? We need to give ourselves some space to allow these new things to come in. Same thing with our health. And oftentimes we may not even know exactly what step is necessary next, but if we can leave the door open for that next step to enter, then that's a greater possibility. But if we stay closed off, if we stay merged with our experience, afraid, unsure, running these stories in our mind, I don't have enough money, it's going to cost a lot of money, it takes a long time, I don't have the time, I'm too old, I'm too young. I mean, there's a million stories that we can run in our mind and beliefs. If we're stuck and we're merged and we're caught in that too much, then we're really not allowing for these new ideas, these new possibilities to enter. And from a more spiritual perspective, that's really what we want. We want to invite in the infinite possibility that something can come to us, right? And I've worked with a lot of people in this space who find themselves in pretty tight situations where they don't have money. And we may even have a path forward, but they don't have the money to be able to execute that. But if we can actually work on the belief that about money, about finances, about wealth and what it is and where it comes from and how easy it is to acquire, then those new possibilities can emerge. And I've seen that happen. Yeah. Somebody with very little financial stability and not a lot of money coming in, if you want to call it manifestation, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. It's not a word I use too often, but I think people know what I mean when I say manifestation. It can happen. $20,000 can come in a matter of a day. And without any idea of where it's coming from. And it sounds fantastical perhaps to some people, and it still does to me, but I've seen it, and I've seen it happen many times over. So I think that's the first step, that whenever we find ourselves in overwhelm, in confusion, in fear, kind of merged with these experiences, merged with a part of ourselves, merged with that fear, giving ourselves a little bit of space, a little bit of curiosity, and starting to open up to the new possibilities is an unbelievable first step.
So what's coming up for me as I'm listening to you, kind of unpack all of this for us, is an experience that I had maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I read Joe Dispenza's Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, which is an excellent book. Yes. One of the things he talks about in the book that I found so powerful and liberating, and actually as I'm saying this to you, I'm like, I need to read this book again, just to transport me back to that space, is the power of the mind is that you don't have to know the how.
That's right.
You just need to see the what, like be in the possibility of what it is that you want to create. And I remember the first time I sat down to actually put into practice some of his perspective on meditation. What is it that I really want for my life in the next 6 months or a year? I actually do this for all sorts of things in my life. One of the things that Roderick and I are talking about now is getting land and building the home that we really, really want to be in, really for the rest of our lives, and I'm the investigator type that wants to figure out, how are we going to make all this happen? What are all the steps? And I could feel myself getting really bogged down, similarly to how we get when we start and I have this diagnosis, how am I going to figure out how to unravel this? And I stopped in that moment and I went over to my cushion, I sat down and I just started breathing in and thinking about what I wanted this to be. And it's a really great energy mover. I find it to be really practical, and you're able to apply it to a lot of areas of your life. Of when I think about my body and my health, I have looked into the future last year as I was really struggling with all this mold stuff. Looked into the future and envisioned the weight coming off effortlessly, getting my mind and my brain functioning like it should. And I didn't know how I was going to create that, especially when I've had all these experiences of trying to get that weight off and it's not letting go, right? How am I going to create that when I just held it in mind? I could see myself there, and it began opening me. And I think this is what we all need as we're navigating. We need to be able to be in the possibility and be in the openness that something good is going to come from this. And as it turned out, that weight dropped off of me in 6 weeks. I can't even believe it. I did a cleanse for 21 days and lost 10 pounds. And the next 3 weeks I did nothing, and I did not get on the scale again. And I just went back to my normal eating, which is healthy, but it's not obsessive. And I got on the scale and I lost the other 8 pounds 3 weeks later. I can't believe how fast it was. Totally didn't expect to have that experience. Right. But it's just, there's something so powerful about being able to extract ourselves from the prison of this is the reality I'm experiencing right here, and move into a place of here's what I want it to be like. And I'm going to see this and believe this and hold on to this possibility.
Yeah, I think it's hard to comprehend how much of an illusion we're living in, right? And it all feels so real, looks so real, and our mind makes it real. And this is what's interesting about the mind, right? It is so powerful. And so what we believe about ourselves, what we see when we look in the mirror, how other people's view us impacts how we view ourselves, right? So we're moment by moment creating the reality that we're experiencing, right? So that's unbelievably powerful. If you just sit with that moment by moment, we are recreating this reality. And so that means that we can either keep ourselves locked in on this one timeline, so to speak, on this one path and this one reality that I'm experiencing, or I can use my mind to create an entirely different level of reality. I can shift the timeline, so to speak. I can think ahead. I can view myself. I can envision what it's like to be healthy, to be happy, to be whole and integrated, to be fully embodied, to have plenty of abundance of food and money and anything in relationships, right? I can visualize that. I can even feel it in my body, right? So we're using the power of the mind, and we're also using the power of awareness itself. Right? And this is, in my opinion, this is what we truly are. We are awareness. We are the great awareness that is. And so when we are able to use our awareness, we can localize it, we can expand it, it goes in and out of time, right? It is the quantum, if you will. And so this awareness is tracking all this, and we can use awareness and our mind to create that new reality. Right. And so that's kind of what I mean, is that we get merged in this illusion that we call reality. And just by unmerging a little bit, we can start to use the mind, use our awareness, and create a new level of reality. And that can open up possibilities that our limited mind, our little small mind, can't fathom. Right. And this is the shortcoming of planning. Right. And I'm one who, that's been a big pattern of mine, is to use the mind as a resource to get me out of trouble, get me out of danger and fear and all the things that I'm experiencing, is using my mind to analyze things, to solve problems, to plan ahead, right? And that serves a valuable function, and it is extremely limited to what is possible, right? So if we allow ourselves to drop that a little bit, use the mind to open up to possibility, use our awareness to envision and find and track the reality that we ultimately want to experience, and believe it or not, can experience in the moment. We can actually create that experience moment by moment, and that will create a new reality, right? And so this sort of manifestation, or this idea of creating this new reality, can look like spontaneous remission, things just naturally resolving themselves. It can look like finding the solution on your own that you didn't know was there. It can look like finding the person that's going to help you find the solution, right? There's a million ways that it can unfold. And so part of it is envisioning and tracking that ultimate result, and allowing the process to just play out as it may, right? And so it's constantly reminding ourselves that that's a possibility. Then the more that we can condition ourselves to sort of be in that reality, to experience that reality, to visualize that reality, to feel into that reality in our body, the more likely it is to come to fruition. And along the way, what's really interesting is that all the things that we're experiencing right now that we may not like, that are uncomfortable, that are causing us problems, there's actually clues. They're actually there to help guide us, to help give us information. And so all along the way, we can actually use those as a way to awaken to a greater truth, to a deeper level of reality, to a more whole version of ourselves. And so there's so much opportunity once we become unmerged, once we open ourselves up, provide a little bit of awareness on the body, a little bit of awareness on the beliefs, on the mind, on the mindset, and just start looking at these things, right? Viewing these things, hopefully without judgment. Although the critical nature of ourselves, there's always a inner critic that's probably going to be present along the way. But if we can learn to sort of accept that inner critic and put him aside or her aside for a little bit and start viewing these things from a non-judgmental, non-critical perspective, then we can just start understanding ourselves better. This is sort of the self-reflection that really can guide us along the way. If we combine that with an embodied perspective, feeling into the body, tracking the body, feeling into the sensations, the emotions, all the things going on in the body, there's so much information there that will reveal itself when we put awareness on those things.
I want to talk a little bit about a specific belief, and let's just explore some tools or way of being with that can help people create some shifts.
Yeah.
And the belief that's coming up for me, because I hear it in our community, people respond to my emails and they'll say it, is I don't have the resources. I don't have the money. I'm on a fixed income. Maybe they've only got Medicare. Maybe they're on disability. Maybe their family has resources, but they've got children who are maybe, one is in high school, maybe they've got two in college, right? And so it just seems like the resources aren't there. How do we begin to unpack the resistance around I don't have the resources?
Yeah, I think first it's to acknowledge that there, on some level, that's true. Right now, I don't have the resources, right, available to me, right? And so we can acknowledge that there's an element of truth to that. However, it is not the full truth, right? There's a greater truth that we can visualize here, right? And so one aspect to that is for many people, myself included, we didn't really learn how to receive very well. So in other words, the resources may be abundant and everywhere, and yet for whatever reason, and I may even be able to see them sometimes, I haven't learned very well how to receive it, how to take it in. And so a good example of this, it's a very minor example, but I think many people can identify with this. When somebody gives you a compliment, do you kind of shy away and kind of duck and dodge the compliment, get a little embarrassed by the compliment and kind of turn it down? Or do you fully accept it, right? That's an element of receiving. That's sort of this feminine nature of opening ourselves up and receiving what's coming in, right? A compliment is a very, very small gift. It's a very small gift, right? And so if we aren't able to fully take in that small gift that someone's giving us, if we feel weird by it, right, then that's an indication that there's an element element that we can work on, that we have an ability to an opportunity to improve. So this idea of receiving is different than going out and trying to get, right? There's been so many times where I've been asking for help and looking for help and going, in other words, I'm trying to find the resources and they're not coming to me. And that has to do with my energy. It's not that they're not there. It's not that nobody wants to help me. It's that my energy is just a little bit off, right? And this is very difficult to explain, but there's elements of conditioning, of what we might call trauma, of missed experiences in our childhood, where we didn't get these things reflected back. We weren't shown these things, right? If nobody's shown you the color purple, then I can explain purple all day and you're not going to understand what purple is. You have to be able to see it, right? So if you've never seen purple, that's a missed experience. And until you see purple, we're not going to get anywhere. But once you see it, then you understand what that is, right? The same thing goes with some of these energetic qualities that we usually gain from our parents or our caregivers. They essentially reflect, they transmit energetically through a lot of different means, socially, and we pick up on these stuffs, right? Especially as we're young beings, we are totally open to receiving all this information from our environment, right? We are energetically open. And so when we have those missed experiences, when we have these traumas, when we have these conditionings, another conditioning might be that's a strong one, right? The fact that resources are hard to come by, right? They are not abundant, right? And that may be overtly said to you when you're a child for 10 years, 15 years running, or it may be sort of subvertly kind of hidden in the language and in the tone and in the way your parents or caregivers or your teachers or your coaches or whomever might be expressing, right? So we pick up on all this stuff. And so that might be a belief that I carry with me energetically and in the mind that resources are difficult. They are tough to come by. And when they're available, I don't even really deserve them, right? So there's so much going on there that would prevent me from being able to recognize, realize, and ultimately accept the resources that are around me. So again, there's probably people listening to this and think I'm full of crap, right? And that's an indication that your conditioning or the reality that you've experienced, which has proven that I'm full of crap, right? So that's the thing. So your experience may be so that what I'm saying doesn't make any sense. And there's others that they have no problem finding resources, right? People are always coming to them with exactly the resources they need, right? I haven't been one of those people in my life. As I've done more and more work with regard to energetics, resolving some of these missed experiences, some of these traumas, these beliefs, these conditionings that I was raised with, then the reality has begun to shift for me. And just enough to where I can say what I'm saying. Like I believe in this. I understand it because I've experienced it just enough, and enough to where it's become a major focus for me to continue to work some of these parts and these pieces in myself, so that the abundant resources that are all around me will be even more abundant, right? And so this is the thing. Like life itself is unbelievably. There is nothing more abundant than life, right? It is everywhere. We have so much resource around us. There is no shortage of resource, of prana, of energy, of chi, right? Of life itself. And so how do we cultivate that, right? So we can actually, in things like Qigong, will actually teach us how to cultivate resource, how to cultivate this chi, this life resource, right? Yoga and Ayurveda also have some techniques that teach us how to cultivate this energy, right? And so when we are able to cultivate this energy, when we are working on our receiving muscles, when we learn how to get rid of some of this old conditioning and these beliefs that we carry with us that are essentially blocking us off from receiving, then life starts to just give to us. And it's unbelievable where these things come from. Again, the mind it's very difficult for the conditioned mind to understand how it's possible that all these resources become available. But if you know some of your friends, perhaps they might call themselves amazing manifestors or whatever, but things just happen. I've met shamans, indigenous healers, where they can literally just generate things. Like it's just unbelievable, the resource they need, right? Whether it's the ability to travel across countries, even though they didn't have the right passport and the right thing and blah, blah, blah. They make it happen. Like things just naturally fall into place for them, right? So there's really, really amazing ability to do this. And so it's something that can be practiced. It's something that can be sort of unconditioned and reconditioned. But I think that's what I would say is that it's very specific for each individual. A lot of times it's difficulty receiving. A lot of times it's in the beliefs, it's in the conditioned mind that is literally preventing from those resources from showing up. A lot of times we can be trying to go get the resources, but again, the energy is off. And so we're unable to actually acquire them, so to speak. And some people don't do anything. They'll meditate and all of a sudden things will just naturally unfold for them. And I know these people, they're very good friends of mine. And I learned from them. They're teachers because they do such an unbelievable job. My conditioning is to do more, right? If I don't have what I need, go do more, figure out a more efficient way, figure out solutions. That's my sort of old conditioned method. The more effective way is to sit, meditate, if you will, pray, however you want to say it, but basically sit into your alignment, work on your energetics, allow, trust, open up, right? And let things come to you. And so there's a different level of reality we can play with. And again, this may be difficult for some of us. It certainly has been difficult for me in my life. It's getting easier. But as we learn to play in that new reality, it doesn't have to be hard. These resources are everywhere and always available.
I got chills when you said people don't receive well, because it's kind of been the story of probably the last 20 years of my life spiritually. First of all, even seeing that I didn't receive well.
It's very difficult, right?
I did not realize that was probably even a thing for me until I was around 35.
Yep.
Like if you would have said something about receiving before, I would have completely missed it. But my journey started in 35, and I had the experience of being in the hospital after a second surgery to fix the first surgery. They stitched up part of my small intestines, and so I wasn't keeping down food or water, so they had to fix that. But I was in the hospital and I needed a ride home. This was before Uber, and I had not told a single friend. Nobody knew that by this time I'd been through so much trauma with the first surgery, not keeping down food or water for 6 days, going into the hospital. I was admitted for 3 days. None of my friends knew. And it made me so uncomfortable to reach out to anyone that knew me to ask for a ride home from the hospital, which of course any of my friends would have been like, yeah, of course, Misty, I'll get you at the hospital and take you home. But
let's honor that, right? So what you were experiencing is very real, like in the body, in the mind, in the emotions. Is a very difficult, that's a reach, right? So what you were doing right there is a reach. So when do we experience that in development? That's around 6 months, a year and a half. The child is constantly reaching for mom, reaching for dad, whatever, right? And this child reaches. That's what we do. We literally reach up and out. And so when we're met consistently, reliably with exactly what we need, then that reach becomes secure, and we become very confident that when I reach, I'm met. There's somebody there that's going to meet my needs. When that's not met, whether it's the crying out method at night when baby's sleeping, whether it's there's a single mom raising 2 kids or 3 kids, right? And they can't meet all the needs, right? There's a lot of reasons that loving, amazing parents won't meet the needs of the child consistently. So that reach becomes inconsistent, and then we don't rely on it, right? And so we'll reach sometimes, but not really. But then we eventually, some kids that aren't hardly met at all, they won't even reach. They just won't reach. And so we literally carry that energy, that whole dynamic gets brought into adulthood, and you're displaying it perfectly. I have the same thing. Many of us do. It's very, very common. And so what seems so obvious, like you reaching out to your friends for a ride, and you knew then in your mind that they would say yes, and then it's not a problem. Now they would say it's not a problem, and yet energetically, emotionally, there's something in there. There's a block that says this is scary. I don't want to reach out because internally,
so vulnerable at the time.
Exactly. Is that if it's not met, then what does that mean, right? It's dangerous. So this is a perfect example, and it's something to be honored, right? Like there's a little girl in there that didn't get her need met, and so she's terrified.
And that's exactly what it was in my case. It was a little T trauma, because of course this was a decade ago. So I've done a lot of investigation into this since then. But it was a little girl. I was the oldest of four, so my mom worked full time. My father was very. He embodied back in those days what we call toxic masculinity today, where everything at home was woman's work. He didn't contribute much with the kids. He didn't earn consistently when I was younger. So, he would quit jobs really easily. And so my mom is carrying everything. She was working 2 and 3 jobs, taking care of us. Right. So you can imagine, as her firstborn, how once I just started displaying any ability to be a contribution, my role in the family was to contribute and to help support my mom and to take care of my siblings. And, you were
adultified early. Yeah. You
very, very early. And that's, I think about, I endured sexual abuse whenever I was a teenager, actually even younger, an adolescent, and a lot of things that we would consider capital T traumas.
Yep.
And working through those and moving through those were way easier for me than the little T trauma, because it was so subtle. I didn't grow up feeling like I was being traumatized by helping my mom, right?
Yep.
It was so subtle for me that I remember in the hospital having that experience and noticing what was happening. Like, I am terrified to ask anyone for help. I couldn't have articulated at that point, Misty, you do not create any space in your life whatsoever for people to be a contribution to you. Yeah. That was, my identity was, I was able to give and be generous and support. And, it wasn't on my radar then that I've created a life where everything flows out and nothing flows in. And it definitely did a number on my health. But the thing for me to overcome and to work through wasn't the symptoms and the sickness as much as my way of being.
That's right.
The exact thing that you're talking about here. Like, I lived in a world that didn't really contribute to me. I had to contribute to it. And then you can imagine when I start not being able to contribute in the same way that I used to be able to contribute, the fear that induced for me, right? Like, what's going to become of me? It was the perfect experience to spiritually break me open in the best of ways, right? But it took a while to unpack and feel into all of that. And I know I've told this story to girlfriends and I've seen the tears. I know that this is a very common thing for women, especially, is this struggle around being able to receive because of all sorts of little T and big T traumas that we experience over the course of our life. The fear around receiving and the vulnerability that we feel needing something from the universe, from God, from our families, from, somebody in society, please see me, our communities, this is a very common thing. And I love that you took the financial resource piece and connected it back to this, because I actually think this receiving thing affects us on so many different levels, because it is the opening to receiving that actually brings all of this stuff. Like even your comment of, let things come to you, before I was 35 years old. I didn't wait for anything to come to me.
Yeah, you go get it, right?
I would have got everything, good or bad, right?
Well, and that's the message, right? That's the message on Instagram. It's all these memes of like, go out and get it, right? Get up early, work hard.
That hustle culture.
Go out and get it, right? Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong with hard work. Hard work is great. It's a good quality to have. And it's also not required. Right? It's not, people think that it's a mandatory aspect to success or to achieving something. That's not the case, right? Commitment, sure. Dedication, sure. Like you got to be committed, dedicated energetically, right? That's different, right? Working hard. I'd rather work smart. I'd rather work efficient, right? That's a totally different thing, right? And ultimately I'd love to just be aligned and allow things to come without any, what we might classify as work, right? But what we're getting at here is this idea of receiving. It also ties into the health piece, which is nourishing, right? So again, this is so fundamental at a developmental aspect of who we are, that perhaps we didn't breastfeed properly, right? Because maybe my tongue was tied and I couldn't latch onto mom's nipple and therefore I couldn't get the milk. Or maybe mom wasn't able to she didn't have enough supply, right? Or for whatever reason, there's a lot of different things, right? Or wasn't able to, she had to work. And so I wasn't able to breastfeed. This is an idea of when I'm sucking, when I'm reaching, when I'm wanting, am I met? Am I met energetically, emotionally, physically with the milk or with the food? And if it's not there, if it's not consistent, then anytime I get a resource, I'm going to hold on to that resource and I'm not going to let it go because I can't count on something being there in the future. Right? Are we starting to see, like, you know what I mean? This is an energetic thing that we get conditioned into, that if I can't count on a resource being available to me, whether it's food or whether it's love, then I'm going to hoard whatever I can get, and I'm going to be constantly afraid that whenever I have or need my next meal, my next attention, that it's not going to be there. So it's this fear of lack, that something's not going to be there, and then when I get it, I hold on to it. And this is what happens energetically in our bodies too. So we can actually, the shape of our body can actually start to reflect this. We can actually hold on to resource, right? So women or men have trouble losing weight. That may be a component. I'm not saying this is everything, but for certain people, it's going to be a big piece of the pie. And for some people, it may be a small piece, but this can be an element of that we're actually holding on to energy reserves for fear of letting go of a resource because I don't trust energetically that something's going to be there. So what we're talking about is something deeper than the cognitive mind, right? The cognitive adult mind understands that there is food out there available, right? But the body, the energy systems, it's a different thing. That's a conditioned level of reality. And so we can hold on to fat stores. We can hold on to things. When we eat food, we may not be able to properly digest and assimilate. We actually don't know how to take in nourishment very well. So this can result in food sensitivities and digestive issues, right? This is very, very deep. What I'm pointing to here is something so fundamental that affects finances, relationships, right? I don't trust the love that's there. I won't let it in fully, or I'll let it in fully, but I can't fully accept it. Like there's deep, deep aspects here where we can let it in, but if anything goes wrong, then we start to create these walls and we push away and we get anxiety, then it may not be there. This has to do with our attachment system, what we call an attachment system in psychology. There's so much here, right? So the physical element of digesting food and the way our body is shaped, the relationships, the finances, the wealth, the job resources, this is endless, right? So it's a really important aspect to start to investigate within ourselves, to look at our childhood history, to start to feel into this resource piece with regard to money. That's probably the easiest one. Money is the easiest one because there's so much energetic charge with money. Yeah. And so we can look at that as a relationship and use that as a template for many other things that have to do with resource.
So I'm thinking about the big ahas I started having probably about 8 years ago around my inability to receive. And I want to share a couple of things that I think you're just going to riff off awesomely. I want people to have a sense of where they can go exploring with this.
Yeah.
So when I first started seeing that I had a pattern of not letting people contribute to me, I started watching my interactions with others. I started noticing more where I was constantly trying to be the person with the solution or solve or give. I started noticing how someone else's unmet need would create a little bit of anxiety for me, and I would feel like I needed to fix it. Right. Yeah. I just started getting more present to how this belief and pattern was playing out in my life. Yeah. And I didn't try to do anything to fix it at this time. I was just like, let me get to know myself through this lens. Like, I started having this whole new understanding of why I did the things that I did, why I took the path in life that I took. Right. I wanted to understand myself. I look back now and what I was doing that I didn't have the language for is I wanted to start seeing me. Because the truth was, in my reality, I didn't see myself. I mean, for real, at 35, when things started, everything kind of collapsed in on me, right? Up to that point, I didn't see any of this stuff in me. And so I wanted to just start to see it, right? There was also, I noticed a part of me that wanted everyone else to see it and respond accordingly. Like there was a part of me that I didn't know how to fully own this and embody something different. So I'm hoping that something outside of me is going to pick up the slack. And I quickly saw that, there's no one coming to save me, like it's just me. And then I started catching myself and being with not solving all the problems and not figuring out all the things and not being the person that would jump up with the solution. I remember going to a restaurant one day with one of my very close girlfriends, who's still a close girlfriend. And I asked the waiter I need to order something that had, I was probably doing some kind of cleanse or something at the time that fits this description. What do you guys have on the menu? And I remember Tina looking at me like, after the waiter walked away, she was like, who are you? Now in that moment, I wasn't thinking about it from the perspective of, I need to practice not having the solution. I had been practicing just not embodying the same way. Right. And when she said that, I realized, wow, that was a really big shift for me to not be the person that, has to figure it all out or ask the question so I can figure it out myself. Right. But instead I just created space for someone to figure it out for me.
Yeah.
But there's a whole lot to taking this apart whenever you realize that I don't know how to receive in the right ways, or it feels uncomfortable to receive, or I'm feeling vulnerable receiving, like it's one thing to have an awareness of that in a moment, but it's another thing to untangle all of this.
Yeah, well, you said it beautifully. And so often when we walk through our lives, we're just merged. We're in our little tiny selves. We're not expanded and sort of watching ourselves interact with the world, right? That's a sort of more advanced practice, so awareness practice that we can use, or mindfulness practice, which is beautiful. And we can just kind of watch ourselves without judgment. But the first step that you took was compassionate curiosity. Let me get to know myself. Let's see what's going on here, right? Let's see what Misty likes to do, right? And it's beautiful. I think this is one of the most practical tools that anybody can start to utilize. And it comes from, I think, in part, one of the maps or models that I like is internal family systems. And there's some languaging that they use in a perspective on human psychology and human behavior and sort of spiritual behavior or spiritual kind of context, I think, that they take that I really, really like. And you said it beautifully. You said there's a part of me. And so they talk about parts a lot, right? And so from that perspective, when we're born, we come in fragmented, right? And this is actually what a lot of the indigenous people believe too, as well as other cultures, is that we come in fragmented and our sort of soul is fragmented all over the place in different realms. And so in psychology, we have these parts of ourselves. And when we get overwhelmed, when certain things come up, these parts start to take over, right? And so instead of being a whole integrated self that can navigate the world, we have all these little players. And so Misty might have 25 primary parts and managers that are all interacting and working with things, right? And so there's a vulnerable one. There's a vulnerable part that is scared and doesn't know what to do and confused and very, very sensitive, right? It needs so much care and so much tenderness, right? And that one, because there's so much fear and tenderness and softness, usually there's another part that comes in to protect that little tiny Misty that's so beautiful and innocent and scared and doesn't know what to do. And that one maybe tries to solve all the problems, really good at problem solving and coming over the top and being very assertive, right? And perhaps very defensive or perhaps very aggressive or whatever it is, or really good about hiding everybody, right? And getting tucked away. But there's these parts of all of ourselves that come in and start to protect the vulnerable aspects, the soft ones, and start to manage the life, right? Whenever there's a sense of overwhelm or confusion or fear, or whenever a need is not getting met, right? And that need can be safety, it can be a connection, right? There's all kinds of these needs, these fundamental needs that we have. So when those aren't met, then these parts and managers come online to protect ourselves. And so this is just a really, really good place to start, is to start to get to know these parts. What parts and what programs do you run? And look, you can use internal family systems. You can use there's 5 personality patterns. There's a bunch of beautiful maps to sort of understand some of these aspects of ourselves, right? One part that I have and does a beautiful job for me is the self-critic, right? The one that's highly critical of the world around me and also highly critical of the things that I do. Now that's a beautiful part, right? And a lot of our parts we tend not to like. It's a tendency that we tend to judge. And again, that's a part. The part that's judging all the other parts, right? Mm-hmm. And so the critical one, right? That's one of my parts. It's beautiful because it's finding all the dangers. It's finding all the mistakes, all the errors, all the places that might create overwhelm or fear or anxiety or any kind of issue, right? And so it's highly, highly adaptive at looking at all the issues so that we don't put ourselves into a place where we're not getting our needs met, where connection might be taken away, where we're not going to find unconditional love, where we're not going to find safety. So it's really, really good at looking at all those things. So that's one of my strengths actually now, is that I can look and find a ton of different mistakes. In fact, I was a quality control engineer back in my day, right? And that's actually the whole point, is to find mistakes and figure out how to optimize the solution so we get, perfect parts, so to speak, on the assembly line. And so it's a strength, right? And if it's running in the background constantly, it can be a limitation, a hindrance. And so instead of creating a combative relationship with these parts, we can really, it's a part of ourselves, right? So we want to actually love these parts, work with these parts, and learn how to recognize that I am not that part. So when that part comes online, the one that's highly critical and judgmental, to recognize, that my part, here's my part, right? That's not me, right? I'm the awareness that is. This is just a personality part. Hi. There's that part. And I can actually, the more advanced, awakened adult version of myself can actually come in and sort of say, hi, acknowledge that part. There you are. Hi. you doing? Right. And so I can welcome that part. And sometimes we can actually create dialogue with these parts of ourselves and ask them to step aside. And sometimes they won't. Sometimes they're very good at defending and protecting us. That's why they're there. They're there to protect us, right? And so to learn to think about these aspects of ourselves as little beings. So we have a whole orphanage of people inside of ourselves, right? And some of them are 2 years old, and some of them are 4 and 6 and 10 and 12, right? So you might hear people talk about, I have my inner child, right? Well, you don't have an inner child. You've got dozens and dozens of inner children that you're working with, right? Right. And they're all different versions. And some of them are very, they're not very sophisticated, and some are highly sophisticated. They're very tricky. In fact, they can trick you. And so we can get identified with these parts so often. When somebody comes in, I have a 2.5-year-old. Children are very, very good at, and our parents too, are very, very good at activating our parts. And so if we're not aware, we get caught in a part really quickly, right? Mm-hmm. Whenever you're in a fight with somebody, spouse, a loved one, you're in a part, guaranteed. Yeah. And so are they, right? And so you can start to learn to recognize these parts. And sometimes it doesn't happen in the moment. Sometimes it's more reflective. Oh, I was in that part. Yeah, okay. That's why I was acting that way. Holy smokes. I was really defensive. And right. And then, so usually there's 2 or 3 parts going on. There's one that's super vulnerable and scared and afraid. And there's one that's coming in and trying to protect and defend and aggressive and all these other things, right? So again, it's getting closer to the real-time acknowledgement of these parts. That's the practice. So throughout our day, they can pop up. If I get an email that says you owe $20,000 and it's due tomorrow, right? That's going to activate a part in me, right? Go, oh my God, what the heck? Who missed this? Where did this come from? Whose fault is this? Why isn't this paid? Right? The stories and the parts are going to start to activate, right? So we can actually view these in real time, or we can view them again after the fact. But the closer to the real time acknowledgement of these parts as they arise, I can feel them in my system. Maybe it activates my chest. Maybe a sinking feeling in my stomach. Maybe I can feel kind of a buzzing somewhere. But you can feel these in the body, recognize these parts come online, and then you can start to work with them. Right. So again, using internal family systems or a model like that is very helpful. But ultimately, this is getting to know ourselves. And that's really what you did such a good job of, is you got curious about these parts and who is showing up in these various scenarios. And once you get to know them, then you can start to get to know what their needs are. So every part has a need. And when we can get the part, its need, then it starts to become more integrated. It doesn't run the show. Oftentimes, it requires another person to help us get the need met of this part. It's something that was missed when we were in our developmental years. We didn't have another nervous system, another person there to sort of help us regulate and co-regulate this part. And so sometimes it might take a therapist or a friend or a loved one or somebody who can sit there and basically just love you for being you, even when you're in your part, and get that part, the needs met of that part. And then it can start to integrate. It can start to metabolize some of these pieces. So that's probably a good place to start for many people, is just to really get to know themselves. And again, using these parts and these maps, I think, is a really good way to do that.
So I was reflecting as you were talking on this time in my life when I was starting to get present to myself. One of the things that also started happening is a lot of relationships started falling away. Yeah. And I want to mention this because it's an experience that is not unique to me, unfortunately. Yeah. When I started seeing what I really needed, I began to see that I had constructed a web of relationships that it worked for all involved for me to not have needs, right? And now suddenly I'm realizing that I do have needs, and it's not working for everybody the same. I'm not getting what I need from the relationship. They might be feeling resentful that, I'm not showing up the same way that I was before. And some of that was really scary. I noticed it professionally and with my team at the time. There was a mass exodus and firing, both that was happening on my team, because I needed to change how everything was working. And I didn't enter those relationships with that expectation, right? So I'm like trying to change the deal, and it didn't work for everyone. But I also noticed this in some friendships too. I didn't want to keep showing up providing and giving in the same way that I had. Not that I wanted to not give and provide, but I needed more flow. I needed more reciprocity. Yeah. So I just want to kind of put this on the table as we're kind of wrapping up this talk, that the commitment to this can be challenging from the perspective of it. A lot of things get shaken, but I can tell in my own experiences, tell you that on the other side of it, it's pretty unbelievable, the life that you're able to create when there is flow and reciprocity and ease, and you're giving and you're receiving. And I mean, I think about who I am today versus a decade ago when all of this started, and it's mind blowing. I had no clue what I was even missing. I didn't know, I feel like I'm in such an abundant place, but when everything first happened for me, I didn't have financial margin in my life. And I didn't know people, resources. I was in Nashville, Tennessee. It was very hard to find any doctor that was outside the conventional medicine box, right, to help me with things. I just kept hearing your labs are normal and things are fine. And this is supposed to be happening. And right. So it was super scary. And embodying the receiving and deciding that I need things to be different and I'm going to believe that it's possible for them to be different was really that first domino to fall. And so many things happened without me making anything happen, which for people wired like you and me, Jason, it's like kind of hard to fathom that life can be so easy, but it truly can be so much easier.
When it does, right? When I've gotten those sort of proofs, I mean, it's the best feeling ever because I have only recently recognized how hard I've been working, right? And but internally, yet I've recognized that I'm tired. You know what I mean? Like I'm tired of working so hard. Yeah. And then when things get to be easy, it's a kind of a mind-blowing experience, right? Yeah. And again, that's a different level of reality that I didn't know, right? So it's kind of in that camp of missed experiences. I didn't realize that it could be that way. And once you start to template these things and they start to get encoded, so to speak, in your system, then you start to operate as if that's how reality works. And that's, to me, it's all true. It can be hard and it can be easy. And so where do you want to be? And so how do we get there is the question. And in my experience, it comes down to really addressing where these beliefs come from, where this mindset comes from, where these energies that I'm operating from, how they get established and how do I work through those? And so once we start to address those, then we can actually show up differently. And that's when the world shows up differently to us. Right? So it really does start within, but it's the most unbelievably powerful tool, and it shapes our reality from our health to our relationships to our finances everywhere. And this is in my experience, I don't know that it has to be this way, but I've seen it demonstrated over and over again that in this sort of these upgrades, so to speak, of your sort of reality, things fall away, right? And sometimes, and I would actually argue that that's happening in the world right now, is that, look, 15 years ago, maybe 15, 20 years ago, I recognized for the first time, as the kids would say, I was red pilled. I recognized what big pharma was, big ag, how much destruction was going on, the medical system and how fraudulent and destructive it is, the university system, all of these systems, the financial system. I was learning about the Federal Reserve and all the financial systems, right? And without getting into sort of the conspiracy theories, it's just the level of bureaucracy and all these institutional corruption that was present. And I was looking at it and going, oh my God. And I was sort of sent me in a tailspin of sort of kind of depression in a sense of like, how do we get out of this? Because as far as I can see, it's a big, big mess. And what I'm looking at is sort of holistic health. And I see all these things that they're stacked up against me and us as individuals. Yeah. How do we change this? And what I see now is that it's all falling apart in the most beautiful, hectic, chaotic, scary way possible. And I would never have imagined it, right? And so I'm seeing the school system start to shift, right? The vaccination thing starts to shift. Homeschooling starting to become a thing, right? We have these alternative financial markets starting to emerge out of nowhere. Organic movement has been continuously improving and moving forward, right? All these systems are starting to kind of crumble and fall apart, right? And so this is kind of a demonstration of what I've experienced in my life as I've moved forward. And I think, again, I don't know that it has to be this way, but it is very common that it feels like your world is falling apart. And this can be your relationships, this can be your finances, your business, right? You had to fire everybody, you had to let everybody go, people are quitting. Whatever the case is, feels like things are falling apart. And in reality, the truth is that you're upgrading, that you're moving on up to another level. And that requires a shedding of your skin, a shedding of your old ways. And it feels scary. And it feels like, what the heck is this, right? Because you're stepping into something new and you've never been there before and you don't know what it's like, right? So this is what's so ironic and paradoxical about the whole thing is that because you're upgrading, you think, oh, it's just going to naturally get easier along the way. And it's like, nah, it actually gets harder kind of, but it's only because it's something new. And then once you're there, you recognize, oh, this is the better way of being, right? And so it's harder in the sense that it's unfamiliar. You're walking into the unknown. Yeah. You get to create something new. That's the beauty of it, right? And the things that you're wanting to get rid of were so comfortable that you got used to them. And even though they're not what you want, right? And so it's like losing weight. It's like going to the gym, right? It's getting thinner is not easier. It's harder, but yet it's paradoxically easier at some point, it just becomes easier, right? So it's very strange at how all this emerges. But
I remember talking to my friend Julie saying, exactly, everything's falling apart.
That's right, yeah.
And she said to me, Misty, everything is falling together.
Yeah.
I remember getting this chill and like there was something inside me that just leapt and I wanted please let that be true. Please let that be true. Yeah. And it was true.
And the way to experience that, in my opinion, is to acknowledge the pain and the challenge and the fear. So it's not in all of the things that we've talked about today, it's not about sort of changing your mindset and sort of, these, I think Tony Robbins calls them incantations, right? This idea of just changing a belief. That's good. And it's really important to feel what's here now.
Yeah.
To feel the fear and feel the panic and feel all the stuff. Hopefully you have the ability to process. If not, you may need another body, another being to actually, another nervous system to help you co-regulate. It's really, really important because sometimes we don't have the resource and we don't know how to metabolize these things on our own. So it helps to have somebody help to metabolize these things. It's not ideal to subvert these feelings. It's not ideal to just shove them aside and go, oh no, it's falling together. It's fine, right? That's bypassing what's really here. And so to acknowledge what's here, to be able to process it, metabolize it, and again, there's information in it. So if we can feel how uncomfortable that is, and really all the discomfort that I'm feeling in my body, in my emotional state, in an energetic capacity, in my visual capacity, whatever it is, how chaotic and uncomfortable it all is, to process all that. There's something magical that happens. There's this transmutation that happens. We are alchemists at our core. When we process these traumas and these beliefs and all this conditioning and this pain, what emerges on the other side of that is beauty and love and clarity, and it's unbelievable. So it's really hard to explain, but that's what happens when we process. And generally, it's an embodied somatic experience. We process something, and sometimes this looks like, you hear it all the time from people that are doing amazing things. They reached a point in their life and they fell on the bed and they just cried and they wept and they prayed that things would be different because they were in such a tremendous mess, right? And they basically hit their rock bottom and they just cried, right? That is a perfect example of actually moving the energy through. It was stuck in their system for so long and it was causing so much turmoil that eventually they finally moved it. And it looked like this billowing cry. They were weeping and they just got on their knees and they prayed and they said, help me find another way, right? Like they're actually genuinely in it and they move it through. And what comes on the other side is something unbelievable. And it can actually be instantaneous. I've actually had this myself where something was so uncomfortable and emotional and challenging. And as I moved it through in real time, there was an awakening process, a realization that happened in the moment that magically shifted things. And so that's a really important thing to acknowledge here, is that to really honor what's happening, not bypass it and feel it, and just recognize that that's real too. What you're experiencing is real. It's just not the full truth. There's a bigger truth out there, right? And so as we move into these sort of new levels of reality, it gets to be fun, right? So it's holding multiple perspectives of like, oh my God, it does feel like things are falling apart. I can acknowledge that. And there's another aspect of myself that recognizes there's a bigger truth out there that is waiting for me. That's really, really exciting.
And it's really important, I think, that when you're in the darkness of things falling apart, which I'm in my experience of that moment, but many, many times in my life.
This can be daily.
Yeah. When you're in the darkness that you do what you just said, and that is, you don't believe it's the totality of the truth of your experience, right? Yeah. Like I've learned I have some muscle around that now, where like, this is hard and it feels scary and I don't know what's on the other side, or I don't know how I'm going to get through this, but I'm just going to visualize what it is I want and what I'm committed to. And I'm going to trust that everything's going to be okay. And the word surrender, as we've been talking, has come up over and over and over for me.
Yeah. And that's an interesting one, right? Because there's this idea of surrender and acceptance and letting go. And your system only knows how to do that to whatever degree it knows how.
Right.
And you can't just force it. Like your system was too brilliant to just let things go. Because
right.
if you let things go as a 6-month-old, then you die. Right. So we don't just naturally do that. There's something that needs to be stabilized, and we get better at it and better at it when we start to do it and accept more and more, when we find safety and the ability to do that. But there's a process that happens in that sort of letting go. So I think that one of the biggest skills, again, in this is to be able to recognize when you're caught and merged in an experience, right? And instead of being merged, we can actually do that in real time. Oh, I'm actually merged in the part here. Oh, wow, I'm really caught in the fear, and I've done this many times. And it's funny how long it can take. A day, it can take a minute, it can take a few days, whatever it is. But you finally recognize, oh my gosh, I've been caught in a part this whole time. I've been so merged with my experience. Then we gain a little separation from that experience, and we can still feel the experience, and an aspect of ourselves can witness while we're doing it. And when you can do that in a relationship, when you're in an argument, and like, wow, yeah, sorry, I'm really just activated right now. I'm really triggered, right? And so so what you're doing is you're disidentifying with the one that's triggered. You're just saying, I'm feeling really triggered, right?
Yeah.
And so you can acknowledge that, like, yeah, wow, like this little part of Jason's getting really activated here. And yeah, I'm noticing that I'm really pissed. I'm just feeling really pissed off at you right now. And yeah, this is interesting, right? So it's like you can bring some a little bit more levity to it. You can acknowledge it, but also not get so fused with it, right? And then when you can have that dialogue with yourself as well as hopefully with another person, and I'm just feeling really triggered right now. By the way, it's nothing you're doing wrong. It's just this is really triggering me, right? Now you're owning it, right? You're not putting the blame on the other person, but you're also not getting so fused with it. And you can just acknowledge that aspect that's showing up. And so having that dialogue with yourself, it's a really big skill to bring into relationships, to bring into yourself when you're working, when you're going throughout your day, when you're, going to get cut off in traffic, when anything goes wrong, you can start to recognize, oh, wow, like, look at me, I'm getting really activated, right? This is really triggering me, right? That's interesting, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can bring some curiosity to it, some compassion to it, while not bypassing. And when you can do that, then you can start to learn what's happening, and you can start to you can find your patterns. And that's a really, really important skill to have. Again, it goes back to that thing that you did at the beginning, which is I want to get to know Misty, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a huge quality to have, is start to get to know your patterns and your parts, and when you're getting triggered, and how do you get out of it, right? And that's a curiosity that you might have. You might pray about it. You might meditate on it. You might do a walking meditation with it. You might reflect on it. You might ask somebody, right? If you're vulnerable enough to be able to get some honest feedback from others, that can point you to these truths as well. So there's a lot that you can do, but I think it really starts from this idea of getting unmerged from the experience itself, having that compassionate curiosity.
Awesome. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I could go for another hour. I would love for you to let everyone listening know where they could find more information about you and your work online. Yeah,
they can go to awakencollective.com. You can find some of my work there, as well as humanlongevityfilm.com, and you can find me there as well.
Awesome. Well, we'll have all the links to this in the show notes. Also, several of the books and modalities that we talked about during this interview will be in the show notes as well over at healingrosie.com. Thank you so much, Jason. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks. Always good to see you.
All right. We'll see you guys. That's it for this week's episode. Thank you for listening. I hope you're feeling more empowered to overcome your flabby, foggy, and fatigued, and to reclaim your life. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss any of our episodes. We have some awesome shows coming right up. I love reading your reviews and comments too. They inspire me and encourage other Rosies to hang out with us and learn all these amazing strategies for healing and living our best lives. Till next time, sister. Bye.